Hi there, Year 6. Welcome to week 6, can you believe it, of our home learning. And I'm wearing my funky fruit shirt today to celebrate all of your hard work over the last 6 weeks, because this is our last week before half term. So we'll see you again after half term. But this is just a little celebration to say well done for all your hard work so far. You've worked really, really hard and deserve a break over the half term. So well done. All right, so our last week of our writing before half term. Let's have a little look at what we're going to do. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay, so my first question for you today is, what was the focus of our history, writing and book talk last week? Pause the screen, have a think, shout it out at the screen, tell somebody nearby. Okay, so if you had a little think, what was the focus of our history, writing and book talk last week? You're right, it was looking at the experiences of evacuees. So on our history, we looked at all of those different sources, that video, all looking at the experience of evacuees, their parents and the host families as well. In our writing, we were writing as a government official to the parents to encourage them to evacuate their children. And in our book talk, we looked at letters from the lighthouse and Olive and Cliff as they go to the train station to board their train to go to Dorset to be evacuated. So this week, we're going to continue building on that research that we've done about these evacuee experiences. We're going to use all of that, the different sources we've looked at, the different interviews and recordings that we've heard, to write a letter in the role of a child who's been evacuated. So the first thing I want you to do now, though, is to think back about all of the different sources you can draw on to create that evacuee profile. So to create a profile about an evacuee and their experience. So what different sources have we looked at that tells us about the evacuee experience? Okay, pause me and write them down. Okay, great. Hopefully you've managed to think of a couple of different sources we've looked at in history, in our writing, that can help you to think about what was the experience of an evacuee. Maybe these are some of the sources you've written down. So we've got the radio interviews that we heard, the interviews with the girls the other week, the interviews with the host families as well, the interviews that you listened to for the book talk. Photographs, a fantastic source to sort of see the scale of this, the evacuation, but also the experiences when the children were in the countryside. Memories, so we heard from some of the different memories that we looked at last week. The memory of the girl who was being taken around to the different houses to be billeted. Letters as well, so we saw those letters in the newspaper last week, and we'll have another quick look at that in a moment. Newspaper articles, we looked at those last week as well. And finally, fictionalised stories. So by this, I mean some of the texts that we've looked at for book talk. So Goodnight, Mr. Tom, Letters from the Lighthouse. This week, you're going to look at another text called Carrie's War, which is a very famous text that looks at an evacuee experience, a girl and her brother who were evacuated to the Welsh Hills. So you can use all of these sources, all of these different experiences to help you to think about what you're going to write in your letter. So we're going to look at a few of these sources again, just to remind you, refresh your memory on the next slide. And I want you to think about what aspects of these could you take to include in your letter. So we've got some fantastic photographs here. I really enjoyed looking and finding these this week. So we've got some photographs, some of these we've seen before. Here's the photograph where the evacuees have arrived at Billingshurst, another where they're sort of lining up. You can see how little these children were. And then here's some great photographs of the children once they've arrived. You know, we have to remember that these photographs were taken probably with the purpose to show the happy experiences that many evacuees had, but we know that wasn't always the case. So here, yep, some of the evacuees taking part in the harvest. Here, some really, really happy. I love this photograph. Some children with the little lambs, absolutely loving being out in the countryside. Children on the horse and cart. Again, you can really see this is a very rural setting. And these are experiences these children would have never had before. So use these photographs to help you think about what experiences might your evacuee have that they could write about in their letter home. And I want you also to pause me in a moment and listen again to these two clips. Again, there are some interviews with some evacuees. You will have heard these before, and also with the host families. But listen, when, particularly with the host families and the evacuees, what are the different activities they've been doing? What are the sort of types of food that they're eating? That's always something to write home in your letter about. And then also, once you've paused me, have another chance to read through this letter by Ellen Howard that we looked at last week in history. That's her impressions of life in the country. All of the things that she says she really likes about living in the country. How it's much pleasanter to walk in the field, cows are mooing, the roads are quiet. Think back as well to your book talks and to Willie's experience of life in the countryside. You'll look at that this week when you come to the book talk we have on Goodnight Mr. Tom. But again, bring that in and use that in your writing. So pause me now and listen to these two interviews and read that text again. Hopefully you've had a chance now to listen to the interviews and read through that text. And let's think now about building this profile. So as I said at the start, you're going to be writing a letter as an evacuee. So you need to think about who your evacuee is. Who are you going to be writing as? So the first thing you need to think about, or one of the things you need to think about, is what your name is going to be and what your age is. And I've suggested you take some inspiration for some popular names at the time. So you can think about names that we've read in our books, Olive or William, perhaps some names that you know were popular at the time. And also think about how old you're going to be, because that will generally, I probably would say you should probably stick to the sort of same age you are now, because you'll know what sort of things you can do and what things you would be enjoying doing whilst you were an evacuee. So you've got to think about where you've been evacuated from. Think back to the learning that we did last week in history, where we were thinking about why were children evacuated from specific places and where were they evacuated to? So that's the next thing. You've got to say where you're evacuated to and who you're staying with. So think about your host family. How are you going to describe them? Are there any other children there? Where do they live? So next move on to think about the description of the house. Build this profile, this picture of your evacuee experience and about the village you're staying in too, thinking to Willie's experience in Goodnight Mr. Tom, and that this tiny little village that he's moved to is so different from London and all of the fantastic experiences he has there. What food have you been eating? Think back to the interview you've just listened to with the host families and the different types of food that they're having with the children. Obviously, we said when these children moved to the countryside, food was more plentiful there. Fresh milk, fresh bread, fresh eggs. So think about how you could describe that. Because rationing, whilst it was still taking place in the countryside, wasn't quite as strict as it was in the cities. And how is the country different from the city? Again, I think Ellen Howard's letter is a really good example of showing those differences side by side that you can also think about. What things have you noticed as an evacuee that are different to your experience in the city? What new activities have you been doing? So again, listen to that radio interview with the girls. They were outside, they've been on the moors, they've been walking, hiking, swimming, all of these different experiences that they wouldn't have been able to do in the cities. And finally, have you seen any new animals, had any new experiences? So remember, lots of these children had never seen countryside animals before. They hadn't seen a cow, they hadn't seen a sheep. So think about how you could communicate that in your letter, show that enthusiasm and excitement at seeing these new creatures or any new experiences you've been able to do. So that's what we want you to do today, to listen and think back to those sources and look at the sources on that previous slide and start to build your evacuee profile. So thinking about who you are who is writing this letter. And tomorrow we'll come on to think about planning the letter and how you're going to include these different aspects. So what I suggest when you come to do the profile today is you set this out as a bit of a mind map. So maybe in the center you could think about what your name and age is as an evacuee, and then around the outside all of these different experiences and talking about the people you're staying with, the place you're staying, so you can start to get a really rich picture of your evacuee's experience. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow and seeing how you get on with the profiles today. All right then, see you then. Bye.